Israel's only hope. We always knew that their only hope and their move was to bring in the United States. But to be honest, just looking at this, I just don't think the United States could do this, even if we did get pulled in all the way. I mean,
Yeah.
what did you think about my statement earlier saying that, this was showcase not only the weakness of the Israeli military, but just Western military in general, the
Yeah.
U.S.
No, I
Because
agree. I
by
mean,
extension,
right,
right?
right. I agree. I mean, let's see. Well, I think again we've been saying this on the show for quite a while that it's the U.S. military is very reluctant to become involved. It's clear that they've been trying to avoid any kind of direct conflict with Iran, and a big part of the reason is that they know that Iran's no pushover. Iran is going to, if the U.S. brings all its forces to bear, yeah, it could do tremendous damage, but it doesn't really have a whole lot of forces to spare. It's of course it's tied down in Ukraine, and it seems to be looking for a war in the Far East, and it doesn't do it any good to the U.S. Any good to actually engage in another major war, and they don't want to. They know it's not going to be easy, and I frankly they know they can suffer a lot of damage. They can inflict damage on Iran. I think there's no question about it. But Iran can inflict some serious damage on the U.S. Can sink ships, can destroy military bases, and the U.S. Military understands that very well. So they do not want to get involved. But and I think they were probably trying to tell Netanyahu that, but he wouldn't believe him. Again, it's just like the civilians, the civilian leadership of the West, and of Israel, they don't understand that the world has changed. I think the military leaders understand better. They may not fully grasp it, but the civilian leadership just doesn't understand. They're learning the hard way.
Do you know how much the U.S. was involved in Israel's
I don't know.
retaliatory
They
strike?
claim not to have been involved at all, and I just don't believe that. Not in the least. Again, they were sending the refueling tankers. My understanding is that, Israel's refueling capabilities are very limited. I mean, they can handle a few aircraft, but there were 100. I'm sure that there were U.S. Tankers up there. I don't have any doubt about that.
What do you know about getting the approval to use the airspace over like Jordan and I guess Syria and Iraq? They don't.
Yeah,
get
well,
the
obviously
approval.
Syria
They just
didn't
fly.
agree.
Yeah,
Right,
right.
right. But they apparently they destroyed some radar installation in Syria, and of course the U.S. does control part of Syria, just a stolen part of the land there. And then Iraq is under their control. That's the key thing. It's actually the U.S. is supposed to leave Iraq, right? I think they've promised to do it. It's crazy. I mean, they're occupying the country. The government there has told them to leave, and they just haven't yet. But eventually they will. And when they do, that's going to make things all the more difficult, much more difficult for Israel, because they fired those missiles from Iraqi airspace, and they won't be able to do that if the U.S. is gone. Because then again, Iran has close relations with Iraq, and I'm sure they'll supply them with, air defense capabilities. And again, Israeli planes won't be able to fly over that airspace anymore. So I don't, this is like their last chance, and they couldn't do it.
Yeah, I feel like we're just going to sit around in the region, have ships in the region, have our bases in the region, and kind of try to stay out of it, but still support Israel to the point where eventually one of these bases gets struck. It's like we don't really want to be here, but we're here, and we're afraid to leave because if we leave, we know that the Israeli lobby is going to go ballistic, and they won't allow it. So they're just sitting there as a tripwire. I feel like there's just
Well, they're just muddling through and just hoping, against hope that somehow they get through this. But it's obviously
is there
a
any
terrible
way
position.
Any way we can get through it? How can this be avoided? Because it sounds like now
you never know,
but
it's it doesn't seem very likely. I mean, it's just like if we stay there and it continues to escalate, it looks like we will be drawn in one form or another. It just seems very unlikely that we won't be. The obvious answer is tell Israel a definite no, and really mean it. It's not just that we won't provide you with air refueling capabilities, but no more weapons for your other two fronts, in Gaza and in southern Lebanon. And and it would be over, right? But we can't say that. Our leadership will not. That's all.
Right. I don't understand how the United States and NATO, Israel, how we don't have a strong missile capabilities. We don't have much of a missile offense. Like, I mean, surely we have the technology to build these ballistic missiles. Is the problem that we just can't churn them out quickly enough? I mean, we watch, we've seen the footage of Iran's missiles coming into Israel. Why can't Israel do the same thing? They just don't have the technological capability, or they don't have the industrial capability. They just didn't invest in it. Did they just put all their eggs into the Air Force and just forgot about everything else? I mean, what happened?
Yeah, I think there's no question they have the technology. I mean, that Israel and the U.S. could make these missiles, and they do, but in limited quantities, if they decided to do so. The thing is, both Israel and the U.S. have really been focusing on and have been gearing all their military procurements and training, everything, every aspect of their military towards fighting technologically inferior opponents for bombing third world countries. And they're really good at that. And that's why. So now they're just caught with their pants down, because now they're dealing with a pure adversary, and say, we can't, because again, you just saw the contrast. They fly over Gaza, they fly over Lebanon, and they drop their 2,000-pound bombs, and they level entire neighborhoods. We know what they do, and there's never is a plane shot down because those poor countries just don't have the air defense. But Iran does. So they fly, and I've heard they got no closer than 100 kilometers of the border, because any closer and they're vulnerable to Iranian air defense. So they got there and they fired and turned around and flew back, and clearly they couldn't do much. So, they built forces that are just really, they haven't really prepared for a war with Iran, which is crazy, thinking that Israel has been itching for a war with Iran for at least a couple of decades. But they always assumed that the U.S., the U.S. is the U.S. They didn't even have to think about it. The U.S. is this, has limitless resources and abilities, and, so we don't have to worry about it. We can't do it, but the U.S. will come to our aid. And of course, the U.S. is the U.S. They can do what they want. But now we're finding that the U.S., its own capabilities are limited, very limited.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. Like you said, Netanyahu, it's been his dream to take down Iran for as long as you can remember. He said he's been talking about this for over 30 years, right? That this was his dream.
Something
and it's
like that, yeah.
You're training for a fight, right, Danny? And you want to take the belt, and you got to take down Muhammad Ali, the big guy. But for some reason, you decide to train like you're fighting a 10-year-old in a wheelchair. Like, that's what it is. Well, it doesn't make sense. How does the military... if that's your goal, if that was your desire, why would you not prepare for this fight? It seemed like they didn't prepare.
It's like the U.S. is supposed to, play the decisive role.
But it doesn't seem like the U.S. is prepared for this fight either. Because that's what we're seeing in Ukraine, that we don't have the missile capabilities or the air defense capabilities, and that's what modern war is about. Or just, it becomes, like we've talked about before, it's becoming wars of attrition. It's at the end of the day, who can crank out the most missiles, most interceptors, the most drones. Those are the three really big ones now. And it seems like the U.S. can't really do any of that.
And artillery shells.
Which also the U.S. can't crank out. And so when we look back on World War II and how the Allies won, it was because the United States was China, essentially, back in the day. We were just cranking out tanks and ships like nobody's ever seen before. And we were able to just keep it pumping. But clearly that's not what we have now. So deterrence is not established, but clearly, Israel is in a pickle. I think they have no choice but to plow forward. How do you see this playing out? What are they going to... They're going to get another strike from Iran? Then what? I mean... I just don't see any way out for them now. Like, what?
Yeah, well, I think that they will... Right. I didn't really see any way out for them before. I guess this is pretty much what we were expecting. Maybe it was just, I think just the Israeli performance was even more pathetic than we thought it would be. After all the big talk, you thought that there would be at least something impressive about this strike, and maybe there is. But I don't think so. We certainly haven't seen it.